In the heart of the American South, where the weight of injustice pressed heavy on the souls of millions, a child was born who would shake the foundations of inequality. This is not just the story of a man. This is the story of a movement. This is the story of a dream that refused to die. January 15th, 1929, Auburn Avenue, Atlanta, Georgia. A neighborhood they called Sweet Auburn, where black businesses thrived despite a world that tried to keep them down. Michael King Jr., that was his name at birth, was born into a family of faith and fierce dignity. His father, a Baptist preacher. His mother, a music teacher, with a voice that could lift spirits to heaven. At 6 years old, Martin Luther King Jr. learned his first harsh lesson about the color line that divided America. His childhood friend was taken from him, not by distance or time, but by the poison of prejudice. Those words planted a seed that would grow into something powerful. Young Martin was sharp, observant. Every injustice cut deep into his memory. His father's courage became his compass. If a man could stand tall in a world designed to make him bow, then standing tall must be the only way to live. At 15, young Martin entered Morehouse College. His mind was hungry. Books became his rebellion. Knowledge became his weapon. Professor Benjamin May showed him that faith without action was hollow, that God expected his children to fight for justice, not just pray for it. In 1947, at 18 years old, Martin stood before his father's congregation. The boy who once questioned his faith found his calling. He would become Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., taking his father's new name, inspired by Martin Luther, the Protestant reformer who challenged the powers of his time. Boston University, Crozer Theological Seminary. He devoured philosophy, Hegel, Kant, Nietzsche. But it was Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolent resistance that set his soul on fire. Here was proof. The oppressed could defeat the oppressor without becoming him. And then he met her, Coretta Scott, a singer with the voice of an angel and the strength of steel. In 1953 they married, a partnership that would change history. Together, they moved to Montgomery, Alabama, where Martin became pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. He was 25 years old, and history was about to knock on his door. December 1st, 1955, a seamstress named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus. They arrested her for that courage, and Montgomery would never be the same. The black community had had enough. They called a meeting. They needed a leader, and they chose a young preacher who'd only been in town a year. That night, with only 20 minutes to prepare, Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech that would launch a movement. For 381 days they walked. In rain, in cold, in fear. Maids walked miles to clean white people's homes. Workers carpooled. Children walked to school. Montgomery's buses ran empty. In that midnight hour, Martin heard a voice, not with his ears, but with his soul. It told him to stand up for righteousness, stand up for justice, stand up for truth, and that God would be with him. Days later they bombed his house. Coretta and their baby daughter were inside. They survived, and Martin stood on his damaged porch and told the angry crowd, December 1956, the Supreme Court ruled segregation on buses unconstitutional. They had won, but this was just the beginning. Martin knew Montgomery was one battle in a long war. In 1957, he founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The SCLC would coordinate nonviolent protests across the South. He trained an army of foot soldiers, college students, housewives, teachers, preachers. They learned to absorb hate without returning it, to face dogs and fire hoses without flinching, to fill the jails with dignity. February 1960, 4 college students sat at a whites-only lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, and were refused service. They sat there until the store closed. The next day, more came, and more. Birmingham, Alabama, 1963. They called it Birmingham, the most segregated city in America. Police Commissioner Bull Connor ruled with an iron fist and hatred in his heart. They marched, they prayed, they were arrested by the hundreds. In solitary confinement, Martin wrote on scraps of newspaper. His letter from Birmingham jail would become one of the most important documents in American history. May 1963. The adults had filled the jails. So the children stepped forward, thousands of them. Elementary school students, teenagers, they knew the risk and marched anyway. The images shocked the world. Children slammed against walls by water pressure, powerful enough to strip bark from trees. German shepherds tearing at young flesh. America could no longer pretend not to see. President Kennedy saw the footage and knew America's soul was at stake. August 28, 1963. They came from everywhere. 250,000 people, black and white, young and old. They filled the National Mall from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument. It was the last speech of the day. The sun was beginning to set. Many in the crowd were tired, ready to leave. And then Martin Luther King Jr. began to speak. And in that moment he did something he rarely did. He set aside his prepared remarks and spoke from his heart. In 17 minutes, Martin Luther King Jr. had articulated the hopes of millions, the dream of a better America, an America that lived up to its promises. The speech would echo through generations. December 1964. At 35 years old, Martin Luther King Jr. became the youngest person to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. But there was no time to rest. In Selma, Alabama, black citizens were being denied the right to vote through violence and impossible literacy tests. They decided to march. 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery. They would walk until the world paid attention. March 7, 1965. 600 marchers approached the Edmund Pettus Bridge. State troopers waited on the other side like an army. They knelt to pray, and then the troopers charged. Billy clubs rained down on unprotected heads. Tear gas choked the air. Mounted officers trampled those who fell. The nation watched in horror on television. They called it Bloody Sunday. But they didn't give up. 2 weeks later, protected by federal troops, they marched again. And this time, they made it all the way. But the movement was changing. Younger voices questioned nonviolence. Black power advocates saw Martin's methods as too slow, too forgiving. 1966. Martin took the movement north to Chicago. He learned that northern racism was just as vicious as southern hatred, just less honest. And then Martin did something controversial. He spoke out against the Vietnam War. The press turned on him. President Johnson felt betrayed. Even allies questioned his judgment, but Martin believed peace and justice were inseparable. April 1968. Memphis, Tennessee. Sanitation workers were on strike for dignity and living wages. Martin came to support them, even though he was exhausted, even though he was afraid. April 3rd. A tornado warning kept many away. But Martin spoke anyway, and somehow he knew. It was as if he could see tomorrow, as if he knew what was coming. April 4th, 1968. The Lorraine Motel, room 306. Martin was getting ready for dinner. 6:01 p.m. A single rifle shot shattered the evening air. St. Joseph's Hospital, 7:05 p.m. At 39 years old, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was pronounced dead. The news spread like wildfire. In 100 cities across America, rage and grief exploded into flames. Buildings burned. The nation convulsed. They buried him in Atlanta. 50,000 people followed the casket, pulled by mules through the city streets. World leaders came. Ordinary people came. The man who walked with presidents was carried to his grave by the people he fought for. Coretta Scott King refused to let the dream die. For 40 years after Martin's death, she carried the torch. She built the King Center in Atlanta. She fought for the national holiday in his name. In 1983, President Reagan signed Martin Luther King Jr. Day into law. The third Monday of every January would forever honor the man who taught America to be better. Martin's death was not the end. It was a spark. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, changed laws, changed hearts, changed America. January 20th, 2009. An African-American man took the oath of office as President of the United States. He took that oath on Martin Luther King Jr.'s Bible. 41 years after Martin's death, the impossible became real. The struggle continues. New generations take up the cause. Black Lives Matter, voting rights, economic justice, immigration reform, LGBTQ+ equality. The tools Martin gave us, nonviolence, love, persistent pressure, they still work. What did Martin Luther King Jr. teach us? That ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that love is stronger than hate, that justice delayed is justice denied. He taught us that you don't have to be perfect to be powerful. Martin had flaws. He doubted. He feared. He was human, but he chose to act anyway. He taught us that the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice, but it doesn't bend by itself. We have to bend it, with our hands, with our feet, with our voices, with our votes. His message spread around the world: South Africa's freedom movement, the Arab Spring, Hong Kong's democracy protests, Poland's solidarity, the Dalai Lama, Nelson Mandela, every freedom fighter standing on Martin's shoulders. Have we reached the promised land? No, there are still mountains to climb. Inequality, racism, poverty, violence. The dream is not yet real. More African Americans are under correctional control today than were enslaved in 1850. Schools are as segregated now as they were in 1968. The wealth gap has barely closed. We've come far, but we have so far still to go. But Martin would tell us, don't give up, don't give in, don't give out. The arc is long, but it bends. Martin Luther King Jr. went to the mountaintop. He saw the promised land. He didn't make it there himself, but he showed us the way. Every child who dreams of a better world carries Martin's torch. Every person who stands up to injustice walks Martin's path. Every voice raised against hatred speaks Martin's truth. This is his gift to us, not a finished dream, but an invitation to dream. Not a completed journey, but a map for the road ahead. Not a perfect man, but a perfect vision of what we could become. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born January 15, 1929. He died April 4, 1968. He lived for 39 years. But his dream? His dream is eternal. His dream is you. His dream is me. His dream is us. The question is not whether Martin's dream will live. The question is, will we have the courage to live it? Keep marching, keep believing, keep loving. The dream lives in you.